Greetings Exiles, BullShifter here, back with another PS4 Path of Exile tutorial video. Today, I'd like to cover the Atlas and some basic mapping strategies. So, to start off, in the last few chapters of the game, you're probably going to start running into a few basic maps, and they'll actually coordinate with the four corners of the Atlas. So, you'll see the Cursed Crypt map, the Fungal Hollow map, the Iceberg map, and the Alleyways map, at least for this current league. This will likely change for future leagues as the Atlas changes with every league. However, for this league, 3.6, or Synthesis as it's known, those are the four maps that are likely going to start dropping for you towards the end of the game. That's going to set you up for running the Atlas and mapping. So, just a few basic things to know. One of the ways that you're going to gain other maps beyond those tier 1 maps that drop towards the end of the game is actually going to be 1, running those maps here in the Atlas. 2, you can purchase them from Zana. 3, you can purchase them from the trade market from other players who may also have those maps. And of course, you can always use the 3-for-1 vendor recipe, very similar to how flasks work. So if I take 3 Alleyways maps, in return, I will get either 1 Haunted Mansion map or an Excavation map. Now the reason why I know that is because Excavation and Haunted Mansion are adjacent to Alleyways. So they have these connections, these little roads here. That's going to be key in when you're running the Atlas and when you're mapping. Because even when you're within the Atlas map, so say I run the Alleyways map, which we're actually going to do here in a moment. If I run this Alleyways map, my highest probability for a map drop is going to be the 2 maps that are adjacent to it, the Excavation map and the Haunted Mansion map. So the Atlas is actually built in a way that is intended for you to be able to progress through and make progress easier. The only maps that will actually drop if I run the Alleyway map will be these 2 adjacent maps and potentially any other maps that I've already unlocked. However, since I've already unlocked this Excavation map and it's adjacent, this is going to have a 4 times higher probability of dropping this map than one of the other random maps I've dropped, such as, let's say, the Dungeon map. So Excavation is going to have a 4 times higher chance of dropping than the Dungeon map if I'm running Alleyways. Now Haunted Mansion, as you can see, it's grayed out. It doesn't look the same as these other ones. That's because I haven't run it yet. So if I run Alleyways, instead of a 4 times higher chance that I have with the Excavation map, I'm actually going to have an 8 times higher chance of having the Haunted Mansion map drop. Just because, like I mentioned, the Atlas is actually built in a way where it intends for you to pick up maps that you haven't already gotten that are adjacent to your current map in order for you to progress further through the Atlas. Now, as I had mentioned in the Bestiary video, there are some special icons on the map that relate to league content. So if you actually go ahead and run one of these maps, you're going to run into that respective league content that has now been made permanent content within Path of Exile. So we already know that Einhar is red, and over here, this gray one, these are delves. So that's going to be gathering resources so that you can run the delve content. Now some of the other ones that are here on the map, as of right now, you can also see this bluish red one, or I guess it's kind of a green as opposed to a blue, and that's going to be Alba. So those are nice to run because of the fact that you'll be able to run them once a day, and then after you run them, you have a higher probability of those masters respawning throughout the Atlas. as someone else was kind enough to mention in the comments of my last video, and thank you again for bringing that up in that comment section. I always appreciate when people can kind of elaborate on the things that I brought up in videos even further. So something I would also like to bring up is when you're looking at these maps, you'll notice there's a bonus there. It says kill boss of magic or higher version of this map. So essentially all that means is we're going to want a blue version of this map to kill the boss in, and that's going to complete that bonus, which is then going to add to that middle counter that you see in the very center of the screen where it says 13 out of 159. That's actually essentially a bonus multiplier. So that is actually going to help us get higher tier map drops. It's going to increase our probability. So once we get to 100%, it's going to give us a essentially 100% higher chance of dropping a tier above adjacent map. And once we get past 100% and start hitting that last 59, it's going to give us that much higher probability of hitting a +2. Now that can also be maps that we've already unlocked as well. Now there are other guidelines behind maps that can drop. So if I'm running this tier 1 map, I can drop any other tier 1 map within that. Now, say I've progressed a little further and I have tier 6 maps unlocked. I cannot drop a tier 6 map while running a tier 1 map. The rule goes for your normal just white enemies, it will drop essentially the same tier map. Blue enemies can drop +1 tier, so I can get a tier 2 map from blue enemies. And from yellow and unique enemies, I can get 2 tiers higher, so I can get a tier 3 map. So if I'm running a tier 1 map, the highest I'm going to see drop from enemies is going to be a tier 3 map, and they would have to be a rare yellow monster or a unique or boss from that actual map. So that kind of goes through and explains the basics of the different maps that can drop while you're running the Atlas. Now let's talk about preparation for when you're about to run a map. So we're going to run the Alleyways map. Now, let's say I didn't have that bonus multiplier yet. All I would have to do is actually take an Orb of Transmutation, which is going to turn my white map into a blue map. So these orbs work the same way on your maps that they would for your items when you're item crafting. So go ahead and use that. Now it's actually gone ahead and added a couple of modifiers to it. Now that's useful for a couple of reasons. One, obviously so I can get that bonus to add to my Atlas. However, even though I already have that bonus, this is still going to be useful for me because of the fact that with these modifiers, as you can see, the item quantity, the item rarity, and the monster pack size has all increased. So not only is that going to improve my chance of drops, improve my chance of better drops, but it's also going to put more monsters on the map for me so that I have a higher probability of drops that way as well, because the more monsters you kill, the better your chances of having an item drop are. Now, another thing to keep in mind here, these modifiers, not bad for the build I'm running, but some things may end up being detrimental to the build that you're running to the point where you may actually want to alter the modifiers that pop up on your map. One of the biggest ones that I'll prefer to, as I like to call it, reroll, and most other people would as well, if I have monsters having elemental resistance, since my attacks are all elemental on this build, I'll re-roll that map. Now if it's just a blue, obviously I can use an Orb of Alteration and it'll re-roll those modifiers, and I'll just re-roll it to make sure that I don't have that elemental resistance. So from here, we're going to go ahead and run the Alleyways, and let's look at the Atlas one more time. We may see other maps drop, however, our highest probabilities of map drops are going to be Excavation. It's going to be a 4 times higher chance than any other map that we've unlocked throughout the Atlas. And our highest probability is going to be Haunted Mansion, because again, it has that 8 times chance of any map that we've previously unlocked on the Atlas. So when you go to start a map, you'll go to your map device, scroll over your map, hit square to move the item between device, and then hit R1 to activate. And that's going to pop up our 6 portals, and we're ready to enter and run our map. So something to keep in mind, these portals all represent the amount of times you can leave and go back into this map. So if I die, I'm teleported back to the map device, and one of these portals will be gone. If I use a portal scroll and I come out of the map device, one of these portals will be gone. So just keep that in mind when you're trying to finish maps, to make sure you don't put yourself in a bad position by portaling out, or know that you are limited to dying, those 6 times. You can't die more than that, or you cannot get back into that map. Now hopefully that's not going to be an issue for you early on, but as you reach the higher tiers, obviously your probability of dying is going to go up exponentially. So I like to run with my map in the middle here, so that way I can see kind of how it's all laid out. And we'll go through, and hopefully we just have at least a map or 2 drops from these monsters. Now something to keep in mind also is, if you are just kind of getting impatient and you want to pick up a specific map from the trade market itself, it's not always the worst thing to do, as long as the currency that you're spending, you're confident that you can remake within the map itself. So like right there, we just picked up a Chaos Orb. Now I wouldn't recommend spending a Chaos Orb on such a low tiered map. However, if we had, then literally everything else we're picking up from this map would be profit. Now, one of the currencies that I personally would spend early on for low tier maps, if it was one that I was just really stubborn and intent on getting, would be an Alchemy Orb. And you'll actually see me picking up a few more rare items than I normally would while I'm mapping, as opposed to, when I'm running the normal chapters towards the end of the game. Simply just because I can get a lot of those alchemy shards right back, and essentially, wipe the amount that I've spent on it. Since I've spent 1 alchemy orb, I can wipe that right out, and then make everything else that I'm picking up throughout the map profit. So I mean, mapping, a lot of it is actually about just profiting, because you are going to want to put some sort of currency into it, whether, it ends up being some of your chisels for later on maps, or if it ends up, as we had done earlier with our Orb of Transmutation, upgrading the map, or if we even use an Orb of Alchemy to upgrade it to a rare yellow map, because later on, as you get into the higher tiered maps, those challenges are no longer going to be blue, they'll actually be yellow. So just something to keep in mind, always try to make back more than what you put into a map. And you're going to have some bad luck, you're going to have some maps where, you don't really pick up a whole lot. To be honest with you, with this map, since we've already picked up a Chaos Orb, we don't really find a whole lot more than that. I'm actually not going to be that disappointed, because a Chaos Orb for a super low tier map is actually pretty good. Although I would prefer that we find a map. One, because I always prefer we find a map while mapping, and the other is just so I can kind of show you how that probability comes into play with the different adjacent maps. So as you can see here, Nico's here. My buddy Nico showed up. So we can actually get some sulfite for delving. Although right now I'm maxed out, so it's a little bit of a waste, but that's another nice thing about mapping, is the fact that those masters all have a higher probability of showing up, so you can run more of that past league content, which, if you get deep enough into it, they all offer some really nice rewards, so they're all definitely worth running. Kind of keep moving through. Now, the Atlas itself does have a couple of main bosses, known as the Shaper and the Elder. We won't get too far into detail with them, however, as I'll likely be doing more than one video about mapping and the Atlas. This is essentially just to cover the basics, to show you an actual map run, so that way you can kind of see in general what to expect. Got a gem covered prism there. And you'll get some pretty solid items, and I actually like to uncover like any stones or just like random things throughout the map as well, because of the fact that they can also drop the same tier map similar to the white enemies. And the more maps you have, the better. Which is actually why, if you have the option to use the vendor recipe to trade in 3 of the same map for an adjacent map that's 1 tier higher, it wouldn't necessarily always do it, because of the fact that you kind of have to ask yourself, you know, even though I can get this from putting these 3 maps in, is it going to be more profitable for me to actually, you know, run this map 3 times and actually receive all the currency I'm going to get for it, as well as the fact that, you know, the probability of me not getting that adjacent map within 3 runs would be quite a stroke of bad luck. Your probability of getting that map that you're looking for is pretty high if you run that lower tier map 3 times, so by all means you can absolutely do it to try and get that map right away, but at the same time you have to think of the investment that you're making and if it's worth getting rid of 3 map runs to gain 1 map run that's only a tier higher. So from here, I believe we've actually finished the map. Since I've already completed this map, it's not going to tell me when I finished my bonus or when I finished the actual map. But as you can see, there's no monsters remaining. There doesn't appear to be an arena portal, so I believe we actually already fought the boss here on the map. A tier 1 map that's only blue is going to be super easy for us to run at this point, so you know, the boss of the map almost feels like it's kind of a bit tougher of a gold enemy. So what we can do from here, now that we've actually picked up everything, and unfortunately we didn't get a map drop, and that happens, you're going to have a stroke of bad luck every now and again, but from here we can just use our portal scroll, portal out, and it'll take us back to the laboratory. As you can see, 5 portals remaining because we portaled out. So just something to keep in mind so you don't put yourself into a bad position. And I mean, for running that map, we had gained an Orb of Alchemy, which, as I mentioned, you know, these lower tier maps, this is probably the most I would pay for one of them. Unless you absolutely need it and it's gold and has some really great modifiers, but I mean, even then, like, I probably wouldn't spend more than an Orb of Alchemy on a low tier map, and that's only if you really absolutely need to run it at that moment. But we got a Chaos Orb, a couple armor scrap, a Gem Cutter's Prism, some skill gems, some items we can identify and sell off to potentially get, you know, some more currency. I mean, so all in all, it was a solid run. I wish we would have had a map drop, but like I said, you're not always going to get those map drops. Now, my one and only criticism of how this is all set up is I hate the fact that they don't put your stash here. So I actually have to go back into town. The only reason I don't really like the way that that's set up here is, you know, and maybe I've missed something personally, but you'll see when I go back into town, if I hit the large center button, I don't have an easy way of seeing my atlas, so you're kind of stuck, you know, if you're not carrying all the maps that you want to run with you, you're kind of stuck keeping it in memory of which map you need to grab from town before you head back to the Atlas. So I really kind of wish that they had put this stash in with the Atlas so that way you could see everything all at once. But I mean, that pretty much covers the basics of what you're going to be doing when you begin to run the Atlas and you start mapping. So just kind of keep those rules in mind. It seems pretty daunting at first because you see like this giant empty map, but as you run maps, you're going to drop maps of a higher tier that you haven't unlocked, and it's essentially going to push you through the progression all on its own. Also keep in mind that all of your masters quests, the little colored icons that will show up on the map, they will refresh every single day. So I don't know when the actual refresh time is exactly, but just keep in mind once every 24 hours, those will come back and they will move, and they'll typically spawn as to where you left off progress-wise within the Atlas. So say I've pushed into tier 4 or tier 5 maps, there's a higher likelihood of those masters showing up in tier 4 or 5 maps as opposed to tiers 1 and 2. So that's where we'll wrap up the video today. If you do have any questions, like I said, I do plan on making a more advanced video in the future on mapping and the Atlas, just because there is a lot of content to cover within the Atlas. So yeah, just leave me any sort of questions or comments that you have down in the comments section, and if it's something quick and simple, I'll just try and answer it the best I can as soon as I can. But if it's something that I feel requires a bit more attention and a bit more of an explanation, it's something that'll probably go in the next video for the Atlas. So as always, thank you guys so much for watching. The channel's been growing at a crazy rate. We're up to over 800 subscribers. Super happy to have you guys here with me. It's been awesome. I really like making these videos, and I really appreciate how involved you guys do get with the channel itself. So again, a huge thank you to you guys. If it wasn't for you guys, I wouldn't be making these videos. And I hope they genuinely are helping you out along through your journey in Path of Exile. It's quite a complicated game. There's a lot to take into account, so I hope that the way that I explain things kind of breaks things down and makes some of it easier to approach and makes things seem a little less complicated. So until next time, may the RNG be with you, always.